All right, folks, we could shut that door. We're going to get rolling here. I want to be cognizant of the representative's time. All right, folks. Next part of this panelist discussion will involve national security. Before we begin, I would like to share something with you. This is Dr. Plan, and I just received permission to share this with you this morning. And I really I'm saying this now so that it is important and relevant to the conversation will be soon available to the event. Very relevant to this conversation. We talk about national security a lot, and our pilots, our men and women in uniform, they're the fight warrior for us, the combat. There'll be a whole sector out there. You also have to be cognizant of. That's our commercial pilots and civilian pilots. And I share with you a bird wrap that was never in copper. It was taken in 2021 over 4 foreign region and now to approximately 21,000 feet by a private pilot outside of his aircraft. And this is a photo I do a copy for Congress to see. It was taken by with all the information on the camera. I just received permission today to share this with you. It is a lenticular object, and look at the shadow being cast. It is significantly large. It's now to 21,000 feet. Taken by a civilian pilot. Now, why is this important? I'll pass this around.
I'll a copy. You could on your pinch it. Well, keep pass it on down for them.
This is taken from a civilian pilot, right? Not a FLIR system, not an infrared system, but an average person with an average camera at 21,000 feet. And the object potentially is anywhere between 600 to 1,000 feet in diameter. It's a lenticular object, and it is silver. Now, I cannot vouch for the veracity of this from the RAF. I didn't tell you that. But this is an example of one of many, many, many incidents involving commercial and private pilots. And guess what? They don't know where to report it. Guess what? Congress has no idea that this has happened on a regular basis. That's a problem. And why is this relevant? Because right now you're going to hear from two speakers. I'll introduce you to them in a moment, who are experts in national security and have been following this topic for some time. What I'd like to do is introduce you to Mr. Chris Mellon, first and foremost. Chris Mellon is a I'd call him a former boss. He was a senior staff director, if I'm not mistaken, here in the Senate at the time with Bill Cohen, Senator Bill Cohen, and then he later went to the Department of Defense and became the first, what you might call the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The position before there was a DASD, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where basically Chris was responsible for all the intelligence equities globally for the Department of Defense, right? Anything from human operations to special access programs and everything else. Chris has been a spearhead in public engagement, getting the academic community, the scientific community, everybody, intelligence community, all to apply their efforts and time and talent and resources to this very real problem. The next individual is Mr. Kirkman Kama, former senior military officer as well, and very senior staffer on the side for the Senate Armed Services Committee, who was instrumental in helping get Dr. Eric Davis to provide classified briefings to certain members of Congress. I won't say who, that's not my place to say. Kurt has been in shadows for a very long time, and he has been extremely effective in getting this topic at the highest and to the attention of the highest levels of our government. And that to include other administrations as well, not just this one and the one before, but the one before that as well. So with that said, there's a whole lot more to go, and I could spend probably half an hour going over their academic vitae, their accomplishments. But rather what I'd like to do is spend some of that time instead and allowing them to have discussion with you here today. Some questions. I think Chris Mellon first has a presentation he'd like to provide. Okay, so I'm going to give the floor to Chris Mellon. Please welcome our new panel.
Busy? Embarrass us. Project cool bird.
Take a look at that overly kind introduction, and my thanks to the congressman for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here with us, and everyone else who contributed, especially Jordan Flowers. I just returned from South America for about 4 weeks, and promised I would not work on anything related to UAP the whole time, and got back here and made a quick turn. All under the weather, wouldn't have a briefing if it wasn't for Jordan and his assistance. What I want to talk about is I don't think the public is aware of the extent of our airspace vulnerabilities and failures and the degree in which they've already been exploited and are being exploited today. And the challenge that we face in trying to sort this out. I'd also want to pivot a little bit based on earlier conversations. I wasn't going to get into this so much, but Dr. Loeb talked about spending $1 billion or so to develop new sensors to collect information. One of my career frustrations in the intelligence community has been that we have incredible sensors that are far more than $1 billion. And we have a great many of them. And they are collecting information today which is directly pertinent to this topic. But that information is not reaching Congress. It's not reaching the scientific community. In many cases, I don't think it's reaching AARO, which is the office that Congress established to study and evaluate this phenomenon. So if we could have the first slide, please. Or is this going to be there for me? Yeah, so here's just a little overview of topics I'm going to touch on, which is the word shocking, I think, is not an exaggeration or hyperbole in this case. We really are effectively dated from the airplane standpoint when it comes to these drones. I'll talk and provide very specific examples to illustrate that. And the UAP. And let me begin here. Okay, this is I don't have this right in front of me, but this is a map that displays roughly the coverage provided by something called the solid state phased array radar system. These are recordedly the most powerful emitters on the planet. If there are other civilizations in nearby solar systems, they're more likely to detect these emitters than probably anything else on our planet. How many UAP would you guess they have detected in, say, the last 20 years that had been reported to AARO? Zero. How is it possible to the most powerful radar? I've been writing about this for years, by the way, effectlessly. Oh, this is not a dupe. I could trade the Congress to somebody in Congress to listen to this and pay attention for years. Kirk will testify to that the observances committee, because I keep going out there and had them for years say, guys, how come this thing never detects any UAP? How is that possible? These are the most powerful emitters on the planet. Look at the area they cover. And oh, by the way, when you look at the area they cover, we keep having reports over and over again from tactical systems, from ships, plane, and aircraft in the areas covered by these radar. So Aegis ships, planes flown by Mr. Ryan here and his naval aviator colleagues and others are reporting UAP constantly in these areas, but somehow these systems never seem to see a UAP error. How is that possible? Happen nobody's asking about that. Is this a Chinese balloon situation where all we need to do is tweak the filters, and lo and behold, we're going to bring into focus something which is, drones, if nothing else, they're a vital, absolutely vital air security significance. We know that in Russia and Ukraine today, drones are causing more casualties and killing more people than any other weapon system, right? So this is utterly transformed warfare as we know it. Here's a multi-billion-dollar system. It's up and running. This is the successor to the old ballistic missile early warning system. So its primary function is to detect ballistic missiles coming over the poles from Russia or China or from North Korea and to develop intercept solutions. But it also has a mission of detecting sea launch cruise missiles and bombers and so forth. So there's one of several possibilities. Either we've spent billions of dollars on a system that's not performing as it should be, or it just, maybe needs some tweaks in the filters to expand the range of things it reports on. One of the challenges with these systems is to avoid clutter, right? Because they're so powerful, they collect so much. They've got to filter it down so what's being displayed is reasonable and appropriate to the mission. It could be a problem of that sort. Or it's simply so highly classified that the information is not reaching Arrow. I favor the latter. I think that's what's going on. And I think if Congress were to poke hard on this, maybe get an inspector general to look at these possible options, or otherwise look into this, they would get some answers.
Quick question. Is that data from that system being archived?
I believe so. I don't know how far back they go and how that's a great question. I don't know how far back it goes. And one of the things, so we approached NORAD about this with the Air Force, and you start asking about this data and what are they seeing. So right now, my understanding is, by the way, that they don't even tell Aero, whose director is supposedly clear for everything, they don't even tell him when they scramble fighter aircraft to conduct intercepts. So they're regularly scrambling fighter aircraft. I've talked to and interviewed on television a NORAD officer who told an account of walking into Cheyenne Mountain where he, for duty, and everybody was standing on their feet looking at the big screen, and there was a UAP coming down from the Arctic along the east coast of the United States. And the commander-in-chief of NORAD said, quote, "I want that thing." And everybody said, "Yes, sir." And they were watching everything we had on the East Coast. Couldn't get near it, couldn't get a radar lock. It disappeared out over the southern Atlantic. Is that the only time that ever happened? There was the one time that this NORAD officer gave this account from the 1990s when the system was much less capable than it is today, and when we're seeing fewer things than we are today, and fewer intrusions over the sleeping airspace. I'd rather have had it. This is, by the way, only one of the number of multi-billion-dollar systems. They're already deployed. They're collecting data that bears directly on this topic. It don't seem to be reporting anything to Arrow. So Arrow issued a report, in their last report, and they said, we don't have anything haven't seen any UAD in space, but there were, I think, 40 instances in which ground-based reporters, like civilian airline pilots, reported things far beyond what they call the Kármán line in the 100,000 feet, which is what they consider outer space for these purposes. Now, there's another system called the ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system, which is a ring of cameras circling the globe. It does nothing but stare at the night sky all night long. How come those systems didn't detect what these pilots are talking about? They're looking up saying, I saw these bright lights moving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's one of those cameras on top of one of our highest peaks in Hawaii, and it does nothing but stare at the night sky. That same night sky all night long. Did it miss that? Was it a cloudy night? Has any of those cameras ever collected one of these incidents? They said there were 40. I would think somebody ought to take an inventory and say, we want to know which of these surveillance systems is reporting UAP and which are not, and what specifically are they reporting. Take an inventory. Again, is there a systemic problem or failure with these systems? The taxpayers spending billions of dollars, I would think we would want to know that. Now, interestingly, with regard to the GI system, I on one occasion had a colleague who was visiting for a sort of routine oversight purpose many years ago. And I said, while you're there, P, why don't you ask them if they ever seen anything strange? I didn't want to say flying saucer, but that's what I was alluding to. And you knew what I was talking about. So he asked the question, and sure enough, this the month before, on that one occasion when the question was asked, they had indeed collected photographic imagery of, it was 4 or 5 objects moving through the night sky in formation, traveling parallel to the Earth's surface. I don't know that the question has ever been asked since. That was probably 20 years ago. I find it hard to believe that in all that time that they haven't collected anything relevant to this question. And I don't understand why that data is not getting the error. I don't know if anyone has even got a checklist to make sure that when Congress issued this directive and said, there's a reporting requirement now, everybody needs to report this stuff, it needs to go to the Air Force, it needs to filter down through the commands. Is anything coming back up from these systems? Do these people even know they're supposed to report? And is there any reporting of that kind going on? There's another system called the Space-Based Infrared System. Multi-billion-dollar system. This is, again, in the unclassified domain, what I'm talking about here. There's quite a bit, additionally, that is paid for by the taxpayer at this permit. It's a very robust system with satellites in multiple orbits, highly elliptical orbits, geospatial orbits, very high precision. It's looking for infrared and heat kinds of events. As far as I know, they have detected, reported to ARROW 0 UAP incidents. Okay, maybe nothing happened. Maybe they haven't seen anything, but it does make you wonder. In this case, it's particularly strange since we know there are dozens, if not hundreds, of UAP incidents happening within the areas that this system is supposed to provide coverage of. For example, Phoenix Nimitz incident occurred, almost directly in front of the radar at Beale Air Force Base, right off the coast. And this went on for about a week or so. And you've had objects descending from 60,000 feet and back up. So I don't think anyone could say, well, they were so small and they were so close to the water, it wasn't within range of the radar. These things were at very high altitudes. And this was going on a sustained basis. So my suspicion is, now I understand that data could be highly classified. I could understand why it might not be the quality domain. What I can't understand is why ARROW does not seem to be aware of this data, and why the appropriate congressional committees do not seem to be aware of the influence of this. Do I realistically expect anything to happen because I'm raising this here? No, because I've been doing this for years. But what the heck? We're here. Might as well try again. Let's go on to to the next slide. So we have an incredible series of events that have been happening. I wrote an article a year ago to this month called "Who's Operating the Drones Plaguing the U.S. Military?" And it did actually get read by a producer for 60 Minutes who subsequently did a piece which featured several four-star officers who in fact confirmed what I was discussing and alleging in the article with regard to the events that occurred at Langley Air Force Base and elsewhere. It is truly shocking. Here's the Air Combat Command, which is supposed to be protecting these gentlemen in this institution where we're sitting in Capitol Hill and the White House and the U.S. government, and they can't protect their own airspace. They have to move our cutting-edge F-22 fighter squadron to a Navy base from the Air Force Base. And this is going on for, I forget how long it was, a couple of weeks roughly. And we're talking about strange craft, bright lights appearing over this base, making it unsafe to fly night after night after night. And to this day, we have no idea where they were coming from. We don't know the capabilities. We don't know who was controlling them. And that remains true, not just for that base and that incident, but for numerous other bases. So the first incident, and the war zone is a great source for Google into this topic, by the way, to record recording. 2018 in Guam, we've installed a $1.5 billion anti-ballistic missile system. And these brightly lit small cracks show up. They go right to the THAAD missile battery, and they're shining bright lights down on it like they're photographed. And this happens 2 nights in a row. So back in 2018, it wasn't as apparent as it is now, but obviously those drones could have been weaponized. They could have easily taken that battery out and eviscerated the ballistic missile defense on our leading facility in the Pacific. Not to mention the fact, I just went to to Google Maps this morning to check that airbase, and that airbase, like Langley and like some of the others, has very few hardened shelters. So those multi-$100 million aircraft that are on the runway could easily be destroyed by drones that are costing, what, a few $1,000? Okay, that's how vulnerable we are. Then in 2019, we began to see this activity off the coast of the United States in California. And I'll read a little excerpt from one of those reports. USS Paul Hamilton observed 4 UAS with a closest point of approach approximately 200 yards off the bow, port and starboard beams. They had a on-time station of approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. So if you have children and you have drones at home, you know that they usually have a maximum time of about 20 minutes. These were in station for 2 hours and 20 minutes, 60, 80 miles off the shore, not apparent where they could have been launched from, what their total dwell time was. The anti-UAS systems on the ship were ineffective in bringing them down. The first UAS spotted by lookouts at 2:40, observed with a single white light. They go on to report others within 500 yards, maneuvering 4 inapt with 4 white lights and a crescent red light. They're not trying to be sly. They're not trying to be clandestine. Approximately 200 yards above the ship, again maneuvering right around the ship, back and forth, up and down. They went to the ridge of the ship with a powerful searchlight or photographic device. So they're actually had cases where they go right up to the bridge and ship and shine a bright light in on the captain and the senior crew. That's how over and provocative this is, and that apparently reflects their degree of confidence that we can't intercept them and bring them down, whoever it is that's operating. That same year, we began to see them around nuclear power plants. In 2020, very strange situation out west. This went on not just for weeks, this went on for months. In one of the least densely populated, there's a slide that kind of shows, and maybe it's back, roughly the part of the region we're talking about here. Yeah, eastern Colorado and western Oklahoma. So we're talking about farmland. I drove out west of the skiing last winter. We drove kind of through the area. It is incredibly sparsely populated. There's very, very, very little there. And yet these drones were operating in groups, clusters, as many as 40 drones at a time. They formed this was so extensive and there was so much eventual furor raised among the ranchers and farmers that they formed a task force involving the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement. They deployed a special plane that the governor of California authorized that had sensors on it. And this continued to occur, and we never found out where these things were coming from, who was operating them. I called a sheriff there and spoke to him about it, and told me a fascinating story. He said he was actually a deputy sheriff, but the sheriff was also a witness. They responded to a call, and there were a group of these lights over this farm, and a brighter light came in, a larger light, and the smaller lights went inside it. And it took off at an extreme velocity and passed almost directly over the sheriff and the deputy. And he told me, I've never seen anything move that fast. He's also in the military reserves, this individual. So, in that report, by the way, he called it a mothership. It's not just the story that I happen to hear. If you look at the documentation from the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, the FBI and so forth, you'll see written documentation from other witnesses that refers to a mothership. So this is actually well documented, very strange and very concerning. We don't know what is operating in our airspace, and this continues, often in militarily sensitive areas. 2023, Arizona test range, as you've heard about Langley, but we do a lot of flying in the Southwest. Flying initiatives are great. It's a terrific place. For the Air Force, we have large Air Force bases there. And some of the strange things we're seeing in the number and the rate and frequency with which this is happening is extraordinary. So this includes, now your average drone is restricted to a flight of 450 feet. We've got F-35s and F-22, well in this case F-35s. They're encountering drones at 50,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 35,000 feet, going 500 miles per hour in restricted military airspace. Meanwhile, in the adjacent area, and I included in my PowerPoint briefing, you can find videos from the Department of Homeland Security, NIDRGOM, about some of the strange things that they're seeing on the border. Very, very odd things. Now, this raises a little bit of an issue that I've written about recently also, with the hope that it might prove some assistance to this task force, which is, why isn't the Department of Homeland Security can publish all these videos, but CARO can't and DOD can't? There was a hearing before Congress a few years ago with Mr. Ray from the Navy, and he said, I assure you, I'm going to review these videos and make sure that we get out to you and the public everything we can. I think maybe there's been one video in 3 years since then. When I have looked into this and talked to people at different parts of the federal government and areas where they basically said nobody feels it's their job to turn this over to the public. Nobody wants to make the effort to submit it for public release. So back in 2017, I provided 3 unclassified videos to the New York Times. You've all seen those: Gimbal, FLIR, GoFast, right? There are a lot more like that. They just haven't been released because shortly after that, somebody created the classification guide, which suddenly said, in contradiction to the executive order on classification signed by the president, that essentially anything having to do with UAP is now suddenly mystically classified because it might damage national security. Even though those 3 videos, the FBI, the Office of Special Investigations, Spear Boards investigated, confirmed they were unclassified. Not only did they not damage national security, they helped national security. They helped raise an awareness for the public and for Congress that we have a air defense problem here. And the scientific community is very eager to get more of those kinds of videos because they want to train AI systems. They want to know what it is we're looking for. They want to measure the signatures. There's a lot they can contribute to this, but the bureaucracy is not responding. And I think I couldn't put a number on it, but I believe that if someone were to poke that system and force them to review that classification guide, if someone were to establish some advocacy for taking that which is truly unclassified, and admittedly, absolutely, there are many videos that would be appropriate with classified, not questioning that. What I am saying is that there are others that fall into this camp that would have value to the public, value to Congress, value to the scientific community, and this is not an expensive proposition. It's just a matter of getting somebody to focus on it and to put these through the process. And I think the public not only has a right to know, I think it's beyond that. I think there's a utilitarian function. There's great value in the public knowing this information and value to the scientific community in having this information. I give the example sometimes of what happened with, and I promise I'm going to get off the stage real fast. So I'm starting to fall into my own stuff here that I get into, but this budget program, I have no doubt if they could have kept it secret, the CIA would not have told the Russians had a satellite at work. And we wouldn't have had the space program when we did. We wouldn't have gotten to the moon when we did. Because the people would have gotten fired up and said, oh my God, this is not acceptable that the Russians are ahead of us, so we need to act. And Congress took action. And it was, it actually, ironically, we ended up collaborating with the Russians in space. And it actually helped facilitate some peaceful developments and relations. I think there are a lot of benefits along those lines that they could accrue. But it's going to take some effort and on the part of Congress, I think, to compel this to happen if it's going to happen. So with that, I will close and thank our congressional sponsors for taking an interest in this and giving us the opportunity to express our concerns and share what we've learned thus far about this problem. Thank you.
Rectify second question. This high-resolution 4K videos of UAP, is this something you know about, or is this something you've seen?
Well, there's some stuff that I've seen and I've asked about, and there's one video I've seen that they're going to declassify, and I hope that happens. It wasn't for, I would say it was 4K. It was more like what you've seen, is infrared sensor gun camera video along the lines of what the New York Times published and the Washington Post subsequently. So it's that kind of video from that sensor system.
So we know it exists.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, we're at a point now where the Arrow has received somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800 military reports. 1,800 in just the last 2 years. Some of those are iPhone videos, so I don't think there's a big sources of methods issue there. There's some Wahidi, some are from, stuff you get at Best Buy and say, oh, there's other ship with a video can landed that. There's gotta be a number in that mix that could be revealed. And beyond that, as I said, I think there's a lot of high caliber sensor data. The American people weren't paid for many of these sensors. They're out there, many of them, and they're collecting pertinent data. Dr. Loeb has benefited from the data that had to do with the reentry of the interstellar vehicle. It was a great example of the taxpayer-funded system that contributed to science in a very meaningful way. I'm here to tell you, I think there's a lot more to that kind of thing that could be made available if someone did a thorough assessment of the sensor systems that we had and what they're collecting and took a hard look at classification issues. We also had a system, precedent ones, where we cleared for global warming to scientists to look at some classified data related to that scientific problem set, and that's conceivably there's problems with that because scientists want to be able to publish, of course. They want their colleagues to be able to see everything possible about the sources, but there are a variety of opportunities I think we're missing. At the same time, there's a huge national security issue here. And we've got stuff in our skies, some of it could represent technological surprise that we need to find out about. And you've got these unmanned systems at 35,000 feet, that's a mile higher than the top of Mount Everest, or the 500 miles an hour. In restricted military airspace, I would say we go on more to you.
Well, thank you, Chris. Justice, I do not have the advantage of height that you do, so I have to bring this way down. I think Chris brings up a very good point. And the reason why I decided to share this photograph with you, take it from a civilian pilot now, is because the same challenges that our pilots, or military pilots, are facing as to where to report it, who's going to analyze it, what you do with the information, multiply that for the civilian aviation community. Do they report to the FAA? Do they report to NORI? Maybe the Air Force? A disciplinary organization, right? Who's responsible for getting this information out? Again, let me caveat, this has not been vetted. This was taken by a civilian pilot. But once again, you would think this information would be important for somebody to look at. Certainly someone in government, certainly some of our representatives that are sitting here, right? These are oversensitive military installations. Whose are they? What are their capabilities? What are the intent? Right. But enough of me right now. Let's go on to our second expert here, Mr. Kurt Pakal. You had a particular all day. Once again, these guests are just unbelievable. Kurt, my question is for you, and I'm going to go off script here for a minute. You have deep expertise and experience with the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is right now the greatest challenge you see for our Congress to tackle this topic on behalf of the American people? What is, if you had to narrow it down to one to three challenges, especially for our reps here that are sitting with us here today, so patiently, what would be, in your estimate, the three greatest challenges facing Congress tackling this topic?
Well, I would speculate. I'm not an elected official. Can you all hear back there? No. Okay, let's do it on Shabbat. We're on your left. There you go. Try to get.
How's that? I certainly don't want to speak for Congress. I do want to mention that I did serve 37 years as a staff member on Capitol Hill for Senate Armed Services Committee and both the House and Senate's Intelligence Committees. I was not in the military. Got that wrong. So I've been up here a long time, but I had no voting card. Never had. I had tremendous respect for the institution, and I don't intend to appeal sort of inside baseball in the nation. What I would say is, on a topic like this, my sense is that Congress needs a lot of competence to push real vigorously. And where are they going to get that confidence that there is an absolute assurance that there's a reality there? And I think as much evidence as has been accumulated in the public domain over such a long period of time, it is subject to question. And y'all know how that has proceeded over the period of decades. The key to this, in my opinion, is firsthand sources who can testify to direct involvement in this so-called legacy program of crash retrievals, perverse engineering. Unfortunately, there are people out there, I believe, from many reports that are interested in coming forward and telling their story, but they are very much intimidated and frightened about doing that. That they're afraid of the consequences, including their own personal safety, is what they relate. Their personal safety, certainly their career, starting with their security clearances, which is the means that they have to make a living. And they have observed some folks who have come forward, not to mention you, Lou, and Dave Rush, and have seen what those folks had gone through, and most of them say, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I think we're sort of in a tough situation. It's almost like, catch-22. We need more primary sources, but it's hard to get people with that kind of information to come forward because of the fear of retaliation.
We need a better whistleblower.
Sir, that's something that I'm sure, as you know, has been discussed in both the Senate and the House.
Why don't you draw me something up really quick?
Yes, sir. Whistleblower protections is finding ways to even compensate them if they do have negative consequences for coming forward, and so forth. So I certainly think this is a major factor. I would just let you ask the next question.
Back on as well. Actually, Chris, please jump in.
Yeah, so there was, I keep the period to address that issue as well. And I came there to contribute what I could to that question as well. But the classified session was canceled. I think due to the sensitivity of the names of the individuals and so forth. I didn't think it was appropriate to, once I could do it in unclassified setting. If they do reschedule a classified setting, I think I'm more than happy to try to provide some specifics. I published a signal message I received from a very senior government official. He described a specific Secretary of the Air Force memorandum. He described a specific recovery site. He described the Air Force gatekeeper for the program. The leading Congress has asked me to follow up on that. I have all that information. I was very sure what I could about that, but I don't know that it would be definitive or easy conclusion. But I do think those names, due to privacy concerns of the individuals and so forth, obviously it's but sensitive. So I'm prepared to try to help with that as I can as well. But in this session, I wanted to address some of these other issues related to classification.
Yes, a general question to either of you. What are the consequences, and either look you can answer, what are the consequences of Congress not taking action on this topic from a national security perspective?
Well, you heard Dr. Eric Davis expressing his understanding of the state of affairs in this arena, which is that the program, the legacy program, call it that, has been sort of stalled. That we're not making the best use of, allegedly, we're not making the best use of the best minds in the country. The compartmentalization allegedly has prevented the kind of coordination and collaboration between scientists to really, crack this very difficult set of physics problem. I'm sure that the security element that's had to be applied to this activity has come with a lot of costs in terms of effectively managing the management program. And it is alleged that this even extends within the executive branch, that very senior leaders in the executive branch aren't aware of this and are not, managing the effort. So it's not a leap or a stretch to suppose that we're hampering ourselves immensely by this continued compartmentation. And certainly Congress does not know whether this activity is being managed appropriately. We don't know if it's got the right level of resources, it's got the right management structure, the right incentives, and so on and so forth. We think our government can work pretty well when we're managing things according to its rules. So I think that this is a detriment to national security, the lack of oversight and awareness. It's certainly possible to keep properly classified things classified and still have an effective oversight and management both in the executive branch and so on.
Speaking of keeping national security and secrets classified, which I completely agree with, there are very specific reasons why we want to keep certain aspects of this topic classified, sources and methods, etc., and certain capabilities. But let me ask this question probably for you, Mr. Mello. In your opinion, what are the counter to ballot? I'm going to trade the ID. Come this to because the fact I'm not wearing a tie, I have to make up for summer. So I've already been accused of being two carrots and not too lax. So trying to be more formal here. Chris, in your opinion, what are the consequences of retroactively classifying information previously unclassified, and are you aware of any specific incidents of information or data that was once unclassified that is now classified?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, though, I think there's piles of that stuff. And I think there's so much of it, it's kind of hard to gauge what the kinds of limits are. Because my understanding is that they adopted the classification guide, which basically says anything and everything to do in the UAP is classified. you're for. Now, people who haven't read the executive order may not be aware. The executive order says, when in doubt, you should err on the side of going unclassified. You're supposed to err on the side of transparency and openness to the American people. And when we're talking about many of these videos, if an F-18 at clear parting pod video was unclassified in 2017, and we're not talking about denied area or some other unusual exception, how could it be classified 2 years when you take the same video from the same system in the same area 2 years later? I don't get it. But that looks like what they did. And the voyage is typically, and I argued vociferously against it at the time. I knew some of the people involved and tried to make the argument that, guys, you wouldn't even be here, we wouldn't be having a discussion if information hadn't gotten into the public domain via Congress and the press. And that's why we made the progress we made today. And now you want to drop a turtle on everything? I don't get it. So I can't really gauge the implications, but I do think they're negative, and I think it's inappropriate. I think it's probably unlawful.
My last question here before we move to a very short break for the next panel. I want to be respectful of time of both the congressional members and, of course, our panelists as well. This next question goes to you, Kirk. You mentioned a little bit about whistleblowers, and I know that from my understanding, and you don't have to talk about it, but I know you received classified briefings before on this topic from specific subject matter experts and some of your colleagues. What can Congress do, specifically members such as Rep. Burlison, Rep. Burchett, Rep. Luna, their colleagues, to better protect whistleblowers, to incentivize individuals to come forward and provide a minimum unclassified information in a way that they don't have to worry about retribution for their careers, and perhaps much worse, and classified information in the proper venue? What can Congress do to help improve that flow of information and minimize the reprisals that some of us have faced in the past?
Lou, I would first off like to say that there is an option, like people who do come forward and want to talk to committees in Congress don't have to go public. They can and have come to the Armed Services Committees, the Intelligence Committees, and in confidence on a classified basis, have related what they know and what their experience has been. The members who have received that kind of stories, accounts, and witness statements have protected the identity of such people, and they have thereby been protected. The negative side of that is that the members can't go around and tell their colleagues what they have learned, because that risks the identity of the people that come forward in confidence, and therefore it doesn't empower members to then proselytize and get everyone geared up to really make a strong investigatory push. But it is an option for people to consider. I would also say that we have a gentleman here in the audience who has conducted a legal history of people who come forward to make classified statements to Congress over a long period of time. And he tells me that he can't find an instance where someone coming forward and giving classified information to Congress without sort of formal permission from the executive branch, that there's never been, and I hope I'm getting this right, there's never been an indictment or much less a prosecution for doing that. Now, I certainly, I'm no lawyer. I certainly don't want to encourage people to sort of break the rules as they see, as they understand them, and what they're bound to by agreements that they sign. But it is at least something to think about, and potentially act on. That obviously takes a lot of courage
to do that. I just like to, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but our panel's coming to an end, and I did want to make share a concern on you after, as you said. We have two different issues here. We have UAP objects that you're observing in flight, acting around military facilities that are, we had an issue of possible recovery of materials. These two issues in the public mind are blended. It's entirely impossible that we might not have recovered materials, but UAP are very real. And here, a blessing, and it's an urgent issue. And I had a concern that if that issue is not in some way validated or addressed, it was the risk of discrediting the entire topic. And we've made enormous progress. Nothing happened essentially from the Blue Book days until 2017. And I fear that if there isn't some effective way of addressing this, that we run the risk of a major setback. I don't know how secure Aero is in the long term. I'm not seeing interest on the part of the chairman of the committees that fund it, on your armed services and intelligence committees. They don't seem to be engaged or supportive at this point for defensive probes. So I think we're in somewhat tenuous ground. Kirk might be just probably in a better position to address this than me, but I think that the second thing that follows medic from Rurik and from that, and how do you manage that? Who deals with that? It's such a transformational issue that it cannot be a press release that comes out of from Congress some afternoon at Friday afternoon or something. It's a literally cosmic issue that runs the risk of having a terrifying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people grab it. So it's a very complex, interrelated set of issues, and I think we and whoever Congress provided oversight of this, really needs to think through how to handle the two of those things. And our foundation obviously wants to help if we can. But I think it's a tough challenge for members who are very, very busy people with a lot on their plates in the complex one.
I'm going to make an exception. I'm going to continue this conversation because there's a question I want to ask. It's very related to with their expertise. Go ahead, Kirk.
Well, I wanted to get to the question that you actually asked, which is just about whistleblower protections. And I'm by no means an expert or even really conversant on the topic of whistleblower protections. But, applying common sense kind of standard, you need to have legislation that really is strong. There's a long record of whistleblowers, despite whistleblower protections in the law. They get retaliated against, and they lose their jobs, they lose their careers, and it happens with enough regularity that no one could blame people for not one complicity. So the legislation would need to be very robust, and I think it would need to include things like restitution, possibility of the government making good on the loss of their career, loss of security clearances.
if it comes to that, and making making sure that that people are not going to suffer these consequences, even though the law said they should never have suffered such consequences. You got to clean up the mess that tends to happen. So anyway, I would limit myself to the.
So one last question. I know you said it before. I'm going to again break the rule here real quick, but I'm going to ask you very quickly. Was try to, for Ken's big question, but try to keep 16 to pretend. And it's for both of you. And I think this is part of the challenge that Congress faces. Okay, so we all want to protect national security. How do you separate protecting blue force technologies, perhaps hypothetically, gained from the insights of UAP recovery programs, but at the same time leveling with the American people about the reality, the fundamental reality that is we do not have a current understanding of everything in our sky, right? About U.S. air domain awareness, but you not have a complete sight picture. And two, that there may be technologies that are not from us and that warrant further investigation. But yeah, at the same time, protecting if we have any technologies, hypothetically, that have been developed as a result.
Well, Lou, we heard from Dr. Davis and many others who believe that we haven't made much progress with respect to deciphering what the physics are behind NHI and these craft that are coming here. At the same time, I mean, we don't really know that that's true. We haven't made progress. Maybe we made great progress, and that we have stuff ourselves that could be pretty marvelous, right? And certainly there can be absolutely vital reasons for protecting that kind of information. I mean, one thought that is crossed my mind is, people say, so the United States government has been into this. Why in the world wouldn't the government have made these kinds of technologies known for the betterment of our citizens and remain common? And one thought is like, what if once you understand the science, what if the engineering? I know Eric Davis thinks that we're maybe 1,000 years from now being able to do this, but what if what if it's not true? And the government is on the horns of a dilemma. Like, it's got energy sources that might be an absolute boon to mankind, but it also is looking at the weaponization of that, and it's terrifying. And so, is there a way that you could exploit that for your own benefit militarily, but keeping this thing somehow, this genie bottled up, where it doesn't come into the hands of a North Korean dictator? So I don't have answers. Lou, I think you've got to deal with this range of possibilities. But the first thing you got to do is understand. Like, we have to understand what the government knows, and until we do, it's going to be hard to develop a rational strategy for managing this. I don't know.
Hudson Hill has risk bucks. I don't think they'll. I think to manage it, I'll leave it at that. Or is that too much already? I'd be eager to get off the stage and turn it over to those.
All right, folks, 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Ben.